So, imagine that you were an operator in Arknights. You're patiently waiting for your release in the global server, and when your event is finally slated to be up next, Arknights EN announces another event to go instead. The huge event that was supposed to be after yours. Not only would this happen to you once, but 2 times, as it also happens on your rerun. This is the story of what happened to Dorothy in Arknights Global. Now, Dorothy has had the unfortunate timing of her event being delayed both times in her initial run and her rerun, slotted dead center of the anniversary event of Global and a meta operator. I wanted to make this video because I feel like the general Arknights player base has got a few misconceptions because of this. Everyone was saving their pulls for the limited character or a meta-defining one, so they defaulted to thinking that Dorothy was a middle-of-the-road operator or not really worth to pull. Or even just that they saw the recommendations to not pull for her and just never gave her a second thought. No! In this video, I will show you that Dorothy is an extremely versatile operator and is always a fun operator to bring in any stage. I also see a misconception that people have, thinking that Dorothy has a high skill floor or just that she's generally hard to use, which I really disagree with, and I'll show you how you can easily use her in any general content. I'll also show you the synergies she has with other operators and how you would generally want to use her in a stage. Like in my whole Hayak video, I will divide this video into 3 parts. First part being a general overview of what she does, her talents, skills, and module. Second part on how you would want to use her in a normal stage and who you would want to pair her up with, synergies that she has, and how to potentially maximize her stall. And for part 3, I will be bringing up an operator that will probably be in the back of everyone's heads when talking about Dorothy nowadays. Just a disclaimer like last time as well, I am not a top-end player. I've been playing this game for a long-ass time, so I pride myself of my game knowledge, but this is very much a guide for a more casual player looking to maximize operators from time to time. So, without further ado, this is why Dorothy is always worth it. Like I said in part 1, I'll go over her entire kit and go over what each talent and skill actually does for Dorothy. Dorothy is a Trapmaster Specialist. This basically means that she can deploy traps anywhere on the map, but cannot place traps with enemies on it. The effect of each trap would differ according to what skill you have equipped. Her first talent is called Resonator. All of the Trapmaster's first talents are similar, basically saying that they are deployed with a certain amount of traps and that they can stack up a certain amount. Dorothy's talent is slightly unique from the other Trapmasters though, because she actually deploys 2 traps immediately as she is deployed, randomly in her range. It doesn't seem like much, but it's never a bad thing. It can help stall out early waves of enemies, assuming the mines don't just straight up kill them. Her second talent, named Dreamer, adds 2% of her own attack every time one of her mines gets detonated, which stacks up to 10 times, for a total of an increase of a plus 20% attack buff. This may not seem like a lot at first glance, but trust me when I say it is a lot. All of her skills have a multiplicative damage scale, so having an additive damage buff, even something that seems small like a plus 20%, would scale really well with any of her skills, especially when you consider her module upgrades. Her level 1 module upgrades her trait so that any of her mines would have a 20% chance to deal double the damage. Even though it's a fairly RNG reliant module, you're bound to get a super mine every now and then when you're spamming her mines all over the field, which you would be normally doing anyways, so it's really a decent trait upgrade. Her level 2 and 3 module though is just amazing. Her level 3 module makes it so that she gets a plus 4 attack increase per detonated mine instead of a plus 2. It can still stack up to 10 times, so the max is now plus 40% attack. The module doubles the effectiveness of her talent. This module is quite amazing, I would say. I definitely recommend building it if you plan on using Dorothy. Her skill 1, Dangerous Entity Removal, generates a mine after her skill charges up for 12 seconds. This part is true for all 3 of her skills, so I won't mention it again. This skill is actually her highest single instance of damage, capping out at 450% on M3, with an added effect of a defense shred of 35%. This is the same amount that Elysium does with his S2. All this is good on paper, but with the playstyle that I would normally do for Trapmasters, it's pretty counterintuitive. The skill has no stalling capabilities and is strictly single target. If there's one enemy that you want to just snipe and kill, this works well enough, but it's not the easiest to use considering that you can't deploy the mines under the enemy. Overall, I wouldn't recommend putting any masteries in this skill, especially if you use her with the way that I'm going to teach you later. Her skill 2, Quicksand Generation, is by far my favorite skill to use. It's what makes you feel like you have a massive brain while playing Dorothy, even though what you're doing is just spamming her skills. The skill deals 300% damage and binds all targets within a certain area for 3.5 seconds. So yes, unlike all the other Trap Masters before her mines actually hit in an area, making the skill significantly easier to use against crowds. I'm embarrassed to say this, but I've lost quite a few Robin mines to dogs because of miscalculations of movement speed. But this skill also does exceedingly well against single target too. This is because when her mine only hits one enemy, the duration of her bind actually increases to 6 seconds, making for an extremely long stall very accessible and easy to use. This is a skill that I use whenever I just don't want to deal with something right now. Not to mention, you can use this skill to stall ranged enemies so that they don't go near you, as your Texas Altar or something comes off cooldown. And don't count out the actual damage that it does. 300% isn't something to brush off, especially with her plus 40% attack buff from her talent. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, let's move on to her skill 3. Lastly, her skill 3, High Speed Resonating Troubleshooter. Jesus Christ, that's a long name. This is probably the skill that most people are familiar with, and it's probably the skill that makes people have the misconception that Dorothy has a high skill floor. It does 350% arts damage to all enemies in an extended plus-shaped area, slowing anyone hit by it by a whole 5 seconds. Now, whenever there's another mine in the range of the explosion, it also triggers all mines affected by the explosion, causing a chain reaction and leads to funny clips like this. This basically lets Dorothy activate traps to damage and slow enemies while they're not on the tile of the other mines yet. I think this is the aspect of Dorothy's skill that makes people think that it's difficult to make the most out of Dorothy. While yes, this does make the skill ceiling of Dorothy high, it doesn't really make the skill floor any higher. She still does what she needs to do and does it really well by just spamming her mines whenever you need it. Need damage and crowd control in a large area anywhere in the map? Just place down a mine. I cannot understate her versatility enough, so I'll just show you how to use her in normal stages. So, all her skills generate mines that can be placed anywhere in the stage where ground units can be placed, and you need to take advantage of that. I use her S2 all the time to stall out high threat enemies in a map that I'm just not prepared to deal with, while also doing a respectable amount of damage to them, so that you'd be better equipped for the enemy once they come to your defenses. Take for example, stage 12-12. This stage on Adverse not only increases enemy movement speed, but also increases redeployment time of your operators as well, which does in fact affect Dorothy's mines. But regardless, it just doesn't matter all that much since her stall is still more than enough. I use Texas here to simulate my point. You can stall out the high threat enemies for a really long time, more than long enough to prepare your big DPS characters that can handle the tougher enemies. Dorothy here being able to take care of the caster enemies just by herself, and stalling the top hat enemies for long enough so that they won't mess up my defenses while I wait for Texas to wake up. So while that clear is going on in the background, let's talk about her synergies real quick. Of course, at this point, everyone knows the synergy Dorothy has with levitate operators, since while an enemy's levitated, they aren't considered to be occupying the tile they're on. So you would be able to place down mines where normally you wouldn't be able to, like when the enemy is already being blocked, for example. Another synergy she has is with any operator that can shift. Easiest way to accomplish this is of course with pushers. You would be able to place down mines behind an enemy and push them towards it, making them trigger all the mines you push them to. Another way that they can synergize is that you can push the enemy away so that you would be able to place a mine in front of the enemy's path again. In fact, I'll show you this now. A bit of an exaggerated example just to drive home my point. You can see that Weedy can push back the mech from DV here, which then Dorothy can place a mine to stall this guy for a longer time than you normally would. This stage in general is just another example on how you can use Dorothy to stall and wait for your damage dealers to become ready again. Much like last time, I use Texas here as the one to do damage, while the robot is bound so that Texas would be in no danger of taking a hit from it, since she'll probably die in just one hit. I also want to mention really quickly that Dorothy is extremely good in all the themes of integrated strategies. I would say that in IS-3 in particular, that she is one of the best starts that you can do, since she is able to carry through most of the stages in floor 1, even in emergency, and she can carry through a lot of the harder stages on later floors. You can see her performance in one of the stages that I personally loathe, Nethersea Brandland, and she's basically soloing the entire stage. I got absolutely nothing for collectibles here, so you're seeing her raw performance on SW7. So for part 3, I shall be addressing the elephant in the room. Most of you are probably thinking that there's a new trap master that recently got released in CN, and people are raving about how amazing she is. Is it really worth to pull and build Dorothy when you're most probably going to pull for a true limited collab character in Ela? Well, I'll show you something real quick. Yes, Ella's mines cannot do damage. Now, you might be thinking, oh, Ella's mines stuns crowds for 5 seconds, whereas Doro only binds for 3.5, and her slow lasts longer for S3 as well. But when you take into consideration Ella's terrible mine generation, which is only around 1 mine every 34 seconds for S2, and 2 mines every 40 to 54 seconds for S3, and not to mention she has significantly smaller cap of 4 mines, which limits her stockpiling by a lot, Ella's stalling is just not that great in comparison to Dorothy. Overall, I don't think Ela occupies the same role as Dorothy at all, being consistent stall and damage from anywhere in the stage. So what does Ela do? Well...
A tooth for a tear's a memento. A tooth... Don't move!
任務を開始する.
Yeah, honestly, Ela steps in the foot of not Dorothy, but other big DPS characters like Posey, the poor girl. It's honestly hard to convey how useful Dorothy is in any stage, since she's not your typical kill everything operator. Although she is fully capable of doing so, the easiest and best way to use her in my opinion is the ways that I showed you in this video. And speaking of this video, I hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again for my next video on Catastrophes. Bye bye!